Hi folks. I just want to thank Stuff in Hamilton for reporting on this terrible story of the Hamilton City Council attacking a guy who's actually got cancer for having his garden shed in the wrong place, especially when the government's about to remove such a stupid rule possibly within weeks. It shows a real lack of prioritisation by councils, and I certainly hope that someone at Hamilton Council will show some common sense, leave the guy alone. If they don't, we're going to change the law in a few weeks anyway. Please do that. You say that, but you should say that in a more venerated way. It's the Waikato Times.
Speaking nationally,
Yeah.
what did you make of the GDP print today?
Well, I think it showed us what most people knew. The period from April to June going into winter was a tough wintry time. I note that if you look at GDP Live, up-to-date forecasts of where GDP is, it's actually at 0.7 for the quarter to date. And that is a much more positive picture, which probably reflects the last couple of months as opposed to the time from April to June. And you've got to remember at that period, the largest economy in the world had just said that they were going to effectively renegotiate their relationship with every other country. That's going to have an impact. What we can control here in New Zealand, manage our own spending carefully, get interest rates down, that's happening, get inflation under control, that's been done, cut red tape, that's been done. All of those things improve our long-term prospects as a country.
On that first point you were making about getting costs down, Minister Willis was just making the point that actually the government is currently deficit spending to be stimulative. It's investing money, but it's borrowing from the world. It's getting more, it's more what it's taxing. Are you comfortable with that? Do you like the government talking about deficit spending?
Well, no, I mean, I would like to see the government paying its way, because every dollar it borrows has to be paid back, mostly by young people. Borrowing money is actually an IOU from your children. So I want to see the government balancing the books, but actually the government does have a forecast to balance the books in just a few years from now. What we are also doing is reducing the percentage of the economy that's spent by the government. That's come down from a high of around 35% under Grant Robertson down to 31% by the end of the current forecast period, by the end of this decade, and that I think is a very positive development.
When do you think you can stop blaming Grant Robertson for the economy?
Well, I'm not blaming him. What I am doing is just pointing out the basic facts that government spending as a percentage of GDP was as high as 35%. We're getting it back down to 31%. That's the track. Now, the fact he was the finance minister at the time, you can take or leave, but the fact is that we are dramatically reducing the share of the economy taken up by government, and that allows us to get into surplus, which was your original question.
What would you say to a business who's kind of holding off on investment right now because of all the uncertainty? Is certainty here? Trump's still in the White House. There's an election next year. Is New Zealand feeling like a certain place to invest?
Well, there'll never be total certainty anywhere in the world, unfortunately. What I do know is that New Zealand is a good bet because we have a government that is committed to opening up to the rest of the world, cutting red tape with new resource management law. We've actually set up a Ministry for Regulation. We're passing a regulatory standards bill. In terms of a good bet, a country where you have some certainty, actually doesn't get much better than New Zealand right now. We're also heavily insulated from the rest of the world by our giant oceans. So in terms of investment and certainty, New Zealand's a very good bet right now. Sorry.
Have you been called out by Winston Peters on the Middle East?
No, I don't.
Well, he said this morning in response to your statements about it that you've broken an agreement, or the agreement that Cabinet went to in terms of how it would approach that decision, and also that it was no time for novices, and basically criticising you for speaking out.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's welcome to make whatever comments he likes, but I just make the point I said very clearly. This is the process for the government making its decision. I was asked what I think. Actually, I think that we should be very cautious about recognising a country that's holding hostages. I mean, that's your basic issue. And I don't think anyone disagrees with that. So again, I think the real question is why are people trying to make a mountain out of this particular molehill?
Well, he's the one saying that it is a decision that it will be widely covered as it's an important decision, and it needs to be done the right way in his view.
Yeah.
He's the one that's going over to New York to take the temperature on it. So why do you feel it was important to step in before that process happened?
well, basically you guys asked me about it, and frankly I haven't stepped in. I've actually described the exact process. I think you'll recall I said that the right minister at the right time would make the announcement. That's consistent with what he's saying. And if you ask me, my views are pretty widely known.
On that GDP stuff, you said that the insulation of New Zealand was a good thing, but Nicola Willis said that's why we were so badly hit by Trump's tariffs, our distance from the world. So is that a good or bad thing?
Well, they're both true, that our distance from markets and our small effective market size means it is harder to grow large productive businesses in New Zealand than, say, the middle of Europe. That's always been true. But it's also true that the middle of Europe's been torn apart by war twice in the last century. New Zealand has escaped that thanks to our isolation. So, there's swings and roundabouts here, but I would say in a more disruptive time as the world is going through right now, unfortunately, being down here is not a bad thing.
Why is it that New Zealand has been so badly hit being compared to Australia with Trump's tariffs?
Well, I think there's always going to be different factors there's always going to be different factors influencing how an economy performs. If you want to get into the nitty-gritty of which industries are doing well in Australia, which ones are doing well here, you can, but I would just say that the government's policy settings are a net positive, and that is what is going to count in the long term. Other things will go up and down.
Sorry,
I'll give someone else a shot.
Is Nicola Willis the right person to be the economic growth minister?
Well, absolutely. If you look at the energy that Nicola Willis has brought to the role, she's absolutely determined. She's got these economic growth committees set up. We're meeting regularly. We're putting in place policies. We're getting a whole group of ministers focused around cutting red tape. As a finance minister, she's managing our finances as a government, so yeah, no question.
Would growth be better for you with the economic growth minister?
Well, I think growth is going to be driven, first of all, by policies and second of all, by economic conditions, much less so driven by personality.
So you couldn't say it would be better if you were in that role?
Well, you've got to remember that I and ACT have a pretty big influence on the government's policies right now, so you can talk about whose name is in which slot. But I'm pretty happy with the influence that ACT has on this government's economic policy.
Just on regulation, the Regulation Ministry has released this report about RISs. It shows that there's a growing percentage of them that aren't meeting all those quality assurance criteria. What's your thoughts on that?
My thought is it's long past due to replace the regulatory impact statement system. They're widely disregarded by people right across Wellington. They don't answer the right questions. They're far too long. And that's why we soon will have a regulatory standards bill that will specify the contents of consistency assessment statements that will largely replace RISs.
If you put on your education, If you put on your education hat for one moment, Minister, the Kōhanga Reo National Trust says the waitlist for Kōhanga Reo has grown to 2,000 and it doesn't have the funding to meet that demand. What is the government doing to help bring those waitlists down?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, they're funded based on the number of students that they get. When it comes to investment in their capital, most early childhood centres have to do their own investment, but in last year's budget, we gave, if I recall, and this is off the top of my head, $26 million to Kōhanga Reo for investment in the property. So, I think it's fair to say, first of all, good. Obviously, they've got lots of demand, lots of people want it, they're doing well. We will fund them for every student hour by hour. That happens automatically. In terms of investment in capital, we've done a bit there. Maybe we'll do more in the future.
Yeah, because the trust has asked for about $100 million to address that issue. Are you considering anything, an increase of that size?
Well, that's a lot of money. In the context of the budget, we had only about $15 million extra uplift last year in total. So, let's think about it, but that's a lot of money.
You said that Palestine is holding hostages. The government of Palestine is the Palestinian Authority. Are they holding hostages?
Well, no, Hamas is, but who's really running the place?
Well, in the West Bank, it's the Palestinian Authority or the Israeli government, right?
Well, in the West Bank, you're talking about it. I mean, Gaza is the focus here. We wouldn't be talking about this if it wasn't for the conflict in Gaza. All right, folks. Thank you very much. Cheers. Thanks.